wouldn't you be afraid? Wouldn't you be afraid? I mean, that is some weird stuff, right? Now, I want to tell you, because I need to be always honest with you. And so I feel that I need to be upfront that I personally, I don't believe in a literal resurrection. And I know that there are UUs who do believe in a literal resurrection, and if that is your theology, I do not want to stomp on your theology. If a literal resurrection is important to you and you believe in that, that is fantastic, and you go with that, and I will support that. I personally do not believe in a literal resurrection. And if you don't believe in a literal resurrection, well, what then does Easter hold for you and for me? And can it mean anything? Well, I think it does. I had an interesting conversation with a classmate in seminary, which is getting further and further in the rearview mirror for me. One day we were talking about these things, and I mentioned that I didn't believe in a literal resurrection, and she was just gobsmacked. She couldn't believe it because her entire faith was founded on the idea of a literal resurrection. And she couldn't understand how I could have faith and move forward without believing in this. Well, we were just coming from different directions, and I told her that, well, my faith wasn't founded on that. I believe that the resurrection is metaphorical, and I believe in the resurrection in other ways, and that if I found out tomorrow that the resurrection was in fact a literal fact, I would find that interesting. And it wouldn't change my faith. I really don't think it would have that much of an effect on my faith. So what can it mean for those of us who don't believe in a literal resurrection? And in what other ways can it be meaningful even if you do believe in a literal resurrection? And even if you do, isn't that a hard thing? I mean, can you imagine just going to bury somebody, going to because why couldn't they do this on Good Friday? Well, it was the Sabbath, so they had to wait until the Sabbath was over, so they go Sunday morning, and wouldn't you be frightened too? Now, I like this Gospel of Mark story because it's incomplete. It's incomplete. Here are these women, they go to the tomb, and they're so frightened, they go and they don't tell anybody. They're so afraid, they don't tell anybody. But apparently the word got out. It does, But in this moment on Easter Sunday morning, they don't know what to make of it. And they are terrified. I have this picture up here. You possibly recognize it. Anybody who knows what it is gets to stay after and clean the erasers. Not the preacher's kid. Who I heard it. What is it? It's Notre Dame. It's the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris in Paris. Has anybody been fortunate enough to visit Notre Dame? I see many hands. It probably didn't look like this when you were there. You know that a week ago tomorrow, that the Cathedral of Notre Dame burned. The roof burned. Many of the artifacts, many of the sacred relics were saved. But right at the beginning of Holy Week, this 850-year-old monument and holy place was on fire, and the world was watching. I was glued to my television set. I couldn't turn away. Perhaps you were as well. I've been there. It took something like 9 hours to finally put out all the flames. And when I awoke on Tuesday morning and started to look at the pictures of the aftermath, I was so pleased to see this altarpiece was still standing. Now, this altarpiece has always been important to me personally. Now, I know that gold burns at a much higher temperature than wood. But I also know that things were falling and breaking, and you can damage things without burning them in a fire. This altarpiece is important to me because I remember being in awe of it when I visited Notre Dame in 2012. I remember looking at it and, well, you know, I'm the religious person, right? So I have to take the theological view of it. I mean, it's a magnificent piece of art, but I look at its theological implications. The empty cross, yes, the empty cross, victory over the grave. Easter. The already of Paul. Well, it's all Pauline, because Paul is really about the already not yet. We haven't talked about that in here much, because at the base is a pietà, which is theologically the same as a crucifix. The atonement, the crucifixion, Mary with the body of Jesus, the already of the resurrection, the not yet of the crucifixion. Victory over the grave, but we're not there yet. Perhaps you know what that feels like. That dream, it's in sight. We can see it. It's but we haven't quite achieved it. And in the epistles, Paul talks about this a lot. Paul spends a lot of time chastising churches. You know, in the epistles, we're reading other people's mail. And Paul has sent these letters to churches telling them, you know, sometimes cheerleading them and saying they're doing a great job, and sometimes saying, what were you people thinking? And trying to whip them into shape. And I can take some comfort in that, knowing that sometimes we make the same mistakes that people made 2,000 years ago. And we're kind of on the right track. So in what ways do you feel already not yet? Well, next week is candidating week for this congregation. Now, if you're a visitor to this congregation and you don't know what that means, well, this congregation is on the cusp of calling a new settled minister. It has been my privilege to be with you this year, and I'm going to miss you when I go. But I am so proud of the work that you've done. But you haven't called her yet. Right? You have to come next week and meet her and listen to her preach, and then you have to come and vote. And there's that matter of where you're going to be next year. Because it won't be here. Now, does that mean that you won't be the church? It does not mean. You know, there's a parish that meets here. I mean, Notre Dame isn't a museum. It's a working church. There's a parish. They have worship services in this cathedral. It's been Holy Week. Today is Easter Sunday. Is that parish gone? It is not. It is not. Their church just burned down. I don't know where they're having services, but I know they're having them. Do you know about the bees? Do you know that there were 3 beehives, and I forget how many thousands of bees, but 3 beehives on the roof of the sacristy? And now the sacristy doesn't have to. The sacristy, we don't have one because we're not all that high church here, and we're, but a sacristy is a little place usually behind or near the altar or near the front of the church where the clergy can get ready and keep all the fancy altar stuff. Ours is, can I tell you a secret? Our sacristy is under the cloth here in some drawers, right? So it doesn't have to be all the high roof stuff. So it was lower, and on the roof of the sacristy were 3 beehives. But you know what bees do when there's smoke? They shelter in place. They go inside and they gorge on honey. That's why beekeepers use smoke when they need to go in and do things with the bees, because you don't want to get stung. It's not nice. And the beehives survived. So there is hope and new life and resurrection in the bee. Now you do. Now you do know that. The beehives, now you know about bees and hives, and isn't that interesting? The beehives survived. I don't know where Notre Dame is worshiping this morning, but just because their roof is gone and it's going to take years to rebuild doesn't mean that they're not a community. Now I want to tell you what's even more amazing and even more of a resurrection story than Notre Dame herself. Do you know that in the last month or so, there have been, in 1 week, 3 arson attacks on African American churches in Louisiana? Now, I've never been to any of those churches. They're small churches. Those churches don't have a particular place in my heart because I don't know them. I don't know those people. There are no relics I've gone to visit. They don't have that same kind of tug that when I watched Notre Dame burn, and yet they are our siblings in faith, our siblings in creation, and it had a different kind of tug, and I was so sad to see them burn. Do you know that by Tuesday or Wednesday, over $1.3 million had been raised to rebuild those churches in Louisiana, because people saw what happened to Notre Dame and saw how millionaires and billionaires had pledged millions of dollars to rebuild Notre Dame, and people said to themselves, hey, that's great, Notre Dame should be rebuilt. Wait a minute. What about these other churches? Generosity begets generosity. So for me, when I think of the resurrection, and I don't believe in a literal resurrection, but when I think of the resurrection, I think of how Jesus just couldn't be stopped. The church just couldn't be stopped. The church grew and grew from this little tiny sect to now Christianity is the largest religion in the world. As a single unit, Christianity is the largest religion in the world, and can be used as a force for good, or as anything can be used as a force for good or ill. I mean, a rolling pin can be used to make wonderful things, or you can wield it, right? So anything can be used for good or weaponized. So it's important that we not weaponize our faith. But when I consider resurrection, I consider the new life that is breathed in, that you just can't keep down. But sometimes we just have a hard time believing it. This is part of why I love eggs so much. Now these are part of my personal egg collection. These are eggs that are in my study right now. I've been collecting eggs since I was like 10 years old. They contain all that life in just this little, or if it's an ostrich, maybe this little, but all that life in just this little bit, waiting to break forth. And we can hardly believe it sometimes. What is it that you can hardly believe is inside your egg right now? Maybe it's something personal. Maybe it's something communal with this community. What is it that you're hoping to see burst forth in your egg? Is it something that you're too scared to tell anybody else? Are you like the women? And you know it's always the women. It was the women who sat and watched Jesus and stayed with him until the last. And it was the women who witnessed the resurrection at the first. And maybe you're like the women in Mark, and you're just like, I can't tell anybody yet. I can't do it. I'm not sure what it is. Or maybe you're just ready to speak it out loud this morning. This is the moment. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk to each other and say what it is that is going to be your resurrection this spring. What is it that you're hoping for? 2 minutes to turn to somebody and share. Talk amongst yourselves. Hi. What's your resurrection? What are you hoping for? I think that's a great thing. Well, that is a great thing. Okay, I like that too. Do you like that? You want to see it? Oh, don't pull it. Don't pull it, but you can touch it, but don't pull it, okay?
Yeah, why don't you ask before you put your hand up?
No pulling, though. No pulling. It's a flaming chalice. Yeah, it's the 2 circles that go around it. You like the headband? Yeah, it's my fancy headband instead of a hat this morning. I see you wearing this. Do you? Okay. Think on it. All right. I encourage you to continue these conversations in coffee hour. I absolutely encourage you to continue the conversations in coffee hour. You didn't know I was going to give you an in-worship assignment, right? But remember that the already not yet means that the work continues. It's okay to be unsure right now. It's okay to be scared of what's ahead. We will continue to blossom. I have to tell you that when I picked these flowers up on Tuesday, the hyacinths were all tight in the bud. And the florist said, don't worry, they're going to open up and bloom. And I had faith. He said, put them by the sun. So I put them by a sunny window back there. Didn't they just open up and bloom? Didn't they just? Have faith. Have faith. Have faith. For you too will open up and bloom. We will all arise. Namaste.